Hello and welcome to Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction, brought to you by the Modular Building Institute. Welcome everyone, my name is John McMullen. I'm the marketing director here at MBI. Today I'm talking with Ken Puncerelli, CEO at LAI Design Group. Ken is here to talk about modular construction from an architectural and development point of view and give a preview of his upcoming session at MBI's 2023 World of Modular. Ken, thanks for being here.
Hey, John, thanks so much for setting this up. We really appreciate it. We're flattered to be here.
It is absolutely my pleasure. So let's dive in. Tell me about yourself. What's your background and how did you get started in architecture and development?
Well, that's a really good question. The funny thing is, as a kid, I always loved real estate. It's the weirdest thing. I used to ride my bike through neighborhoods of Tenafly, New Jersey, which is near the George Washington Bridge. It takes you to New York City. And a friend of mine by the name of Gene Bowen lived in a really nice neighborhood, and I used to help him with his paper route. And he and I had snow shoveling routes and lawn mowing routes and did landscaping and all this stuff. And so I really loved real estate. And then I found myself through high school, junior high, really, working construction jobs for masons and carpenters back before they had child labor laws, which I'm not sure if those are really good to have. I think kids should work. But anyway, I did that as a kid. And then when I got into college, I studied design. And then at a graduate level, I also studied business and finance. And I think finance is one of the most important things for a design professional to kind of bring the whole world of development together, just because you then become the complete left brain, right brain professional, and you can be the best advocate for your client.
But I have not heard that point of view before, but that makes a lot of sense. So tell me about when you started incorporating modular construction into your portfolio. When did you get interested in that?
Well, that's a good question. So what actually ended up happening, modular found us. We didn't find modular, if the truth be told. And that happened about either 2003 or 2004. And we had a modular manufacturer actually by the name of Gurdon Enterprises, and they're very well known in the industry. And they were fairly new as well. They were, I wouldn't say a startup company, but they were a new company at that time in the early 2000s. And we did a workforce housing project for them up in the mountains in Gypsum, Colorado. And then we didn't work together again for probably close to a decade. And it wasn't by choice. It was just kind of happenstance. We all went in different directions, and then we got reacquainted in the Bakken or Williston, North Dakota, when the oil boom was going on from about 2010, 11 until everything kind of died down from a development standpoint in early 2015. So we found ourselves reacquainted and re-engaged with Gurdon and others in that region of the U.S. It was actually pretty cool.
So tell me about the project itself. Did you have any challenges? I know modular can be sort of a very different sort of a skill set when it comes to design and construction. What were your big hurdles for those first projects?
Yeah, so that is something that really comes down to understanding the parameters for design, as well as shipping, logistics, client expectations about what modular is and what it isn't. Now, my philosophy is that you can hang, when I say hang, you can ornament or put ornamentation on any building using modular, or virtually any building using a modular construction delivery method. But really the biggest thing that we had to wrap our brains around is, okay, how big is a bedroom, for example? And then how does that translate into a master ensuite if you're thinking about apartments?
Mhm.
Then how does that width translate into a hallway and then to a mirror image apartment on the other side? So once you started wrapping your brain around the minimum and maximum as well as optimum widths of a modular box, as well as maximum lengths for shipping and putting that box on a lowboy truck, then the world kind of becomes your oyster. Then, then you can kind of wrap your brain.
So now that your brain is wrapped around modular construction, tell me about how your process starts now. Now, once you understand the scope of a project, what's your first step?
So because our firm is involved in, we have landscape architects that do land planning and zoning. I myself am trained in both architecture and landscape architecture, and so we start by programming of the site, how big's the site, and then just like you would with a site built project, what's the intended building use and square footage or number of apartments that the developer wants and hotels or anything else like that. So we start out really the same way that we would with a site built project, and kind of go from there.
So one question I like asking architects and designers, because you have definitely a different point of view than manufacturers or anyone else. Are most modular products very similar from your point of view, or does each project need to have a unique module design that requires sort of starting from scratch?
Okay, so conceptually, yes, they're similar, but each is unique because given the fact that each site is different, oftentimes each client, because of either the site or the economic projections of a client's project, dictate something unique about it. It's that, and site built projects have that same common denominator. So we begin really by sketching prototypical floor plans using a modular grid system and using the pattern of sizes and shapes that can be produced in the factory using that system. And then, like I intimated before, we also need to keep in mind the maximum widths and lengths for shipping purposes. So we can't just think about design, we have to think about engineering and logistics. And so really the optimum width of a modular box itself is about 14 feet wide. You can go down to 10 and you can go up to about 20. And I've heard people talk about going to 21 or 22, but when you get up to about 16 feet wide, you need additional assistance in the transportation of that project. So you need escorts, the chaser cars, all them with the lights and everything to alert other drivers on the interstates that you've got a wide load semi hauling these boxes down the road. So that's another part of it. And then lastly, the one major difference with modular versus a site built is because the ground floor, if it's not a site built ground floor, like a podium, parking garage, or the first floor of a hotel that's got all of the lobby and all of that kind of stuff in it, the first floor will have a crawl space underneath the foundation. So that's something you have to wrap your head around when designing a modular structure.
So in terms of modular structures themselves, is there a difference in the design of a module that's intended, say, for a single family home versus a multifamily or a hotel project, or are they all generally the same?
The short answer is yes. They are different. So a house falls under a different set of construction standards, whereas multifamily, hotel, and other commercial structures have a host of additional requirements. And these include sprinkler systems, fire rated assemblies, sound attenuation between apartments or hotels, ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, which encapsulates design in hotels in particular, sight impaired, hearing impaired, as well as wheelchair accessibility, whereas oftentimes in a multifamily setting, it's often just the wheelchair accessibility. And then in addition to that, there's occupancy loads for fire and fire separation. I think I mentioned sprinkler systems, as well as other structural considerations such as shear walls. And a lot of these kinds of things are shear walls are somewhat built into the modular design because each box has to be its own sustainable room, so to speak, and series of walls. And so a lot of people ask me, well, geez, is modular shoddy construction? I said, no, it's actually better built than my own personal residence, which I was the designer and general contractor.
So, what don't people understand about designing for modular construction? Is there something that you find yourself repeating to clients about the process?
I do, especially lately, because as I told you, we started in around 03, 04, and then we picked it up again in the next decade, and then it went away. We found in our shop that clients weren't asking for modular after 2015. It kind of just evaporated in our office until about 2020 when the pandemic hit. And so because of that, I now think it's here to stay, whereas it was kind of ebb and flow because most people in the construction industry are late adopters. So something new and different is scary than the way they've done it for 50 years. So one thing with when you say it's modular, it's manufactured in a factory, you still have to reiterate to a client that keep in mind, it's still construction. You're not buying an IKEA bookshelf that's perfectly pristine and without imperfections. This is still construction, and there are things that need to be resolved in the field from time to time that weren't contemplated either in design or they were missed in the factory or a host of other things. But you should have a healthy appreciation that about 60% of the construction of your new building is done in the factory. The other 40% is on site. And so as a result of that, the other biggest thing that I say is make sure you have an experienced contractor build your project. And I think that's key because as design or construction professionals, we're also psychologists. And so we have to be able to convey information, even bad news, and come up with solutions. And that's the best.
So, as I mentioned at the top, you are planning to speak at MBI's upcoming World of Modular, and your presentation is about the fundamentals of modular design. I noticed in your session description that you're going to touch on regulatory permitting considerations as well. Can you tell me more about what attendees can expect from that portion of your session?
Yeah, and it'll be high level at the session, but it's important for the audience. Some are experienced developers of modular, and others are trying to learn about it and get into it. And so one of the things that is important for people to understand. Just like when you go through a planning and zoning submittal, and there's multiple agencies within an application, the same is true for modular. It's not just pulling a building permit with the local building official. The plans actually are submitted to the state engineer's office for review. And additionally, there's third-party inspections that occur at the factory for compliance with codes. And I always think, and sometimes this happens and sometimes it doesn't, it's not my thinking part, but I always think it's a really good idea to meet with local building officials, to do a workshop with them and explain how the project works, and have your contractor there in attendance. It's not only educational for a building official, but it's also a good relationship builder for all, because once you're in the throes of construction, at least everybody's been briefed on this. And I find that fear comes through ignorance. And if people don't have a relationship to begin with, and they don't have any information to begin with, then there's all kinds of distrust, fear, and as a result of that, you can have some real conflicts in the field. So what happens is, if you do a little workshop type of a meeting with the building officials to begin with, and I'm talking the local building officials that may not have experienced modular before, it almost functions like a pre-application or a pre-building permit type of meeting to get everybody on the same page about construction details, what's different from what they're used to seeing, life safety, ADA, fire rated assemblies, how we're addressing this or that, fire sprinkler systems, all kinds of things like that. So it just is a great dialogue. I think, as we all know, in life, if you're failing to communicate, you're failing.
Well, you weren't kidding about the psychology aspect of your profession. It sounds like you've been well versed in all the ins and outs of good communication with your stakeholders. So that's fantastic advice.
Thank you. Well, my hair did used to be black, and I had more of it.
So without ruining too much of your presentation, I was wondering if you could walk me through the process of permitting a modular or a prefabricated project, maybe a multifamily residential project. Are there common regulatory hurdles that projects face?
Sure. So as I stated, the state permit process, once you're approved, you walk through the local jurisdiction. So you submit to the state, then the local jurisdiction will review the plans. But what happens is they'll typically defer to the state engineer's office for approval. And typically, a local building department doesn't take over, but they will do periodic site inspections or inspections on site. And again, this kind of goes back to my previous commentary about having that workshop meeting, because sometimes you can have a local inspector and we just had this happen, that's new to the building inspection business and new to modular, and perhaps wants to make a name for themselves. And so sometimes you can get conflicting direction from the two agencies. And at the end of the day, you've got to satisfy everybody and get the project built, because delays are not good for projects. So
no, never are. And you'll have to forgive my ignorance. I'm going to ask perhaps what may be an obvious question. Is the permitting process different for different types of buildings, multifamily versus hotel versus the parking garage, anything else? And in your experience, does it really matter if the project is modular or not?
Well, I think it does. It is different if it's modular or not. And I think we've kind of cited some reasons. But in addition to that, back to your question about multifamily versus hotel, the big items are exiting the building, smoke detection, fire dampers in your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, sprinklers, fire rated assemblies, and ADA. So a multifamily building and hotel are very similar. One is an R2 type of building, which is the multifamily, and the hotel is an R1. So there are similar things, but a bit more intense because one is a much more intensified commercial building. So ADA for hearing impaired, visually impaired, those type of things are more prevalent in hotels than multifamily.
What's one piece of advice you might offer to an owner developer who's thinking about or has decided to use modular construction for the first time? What should he or she know at the outset?
That's a really good question. For me, I would not advocate a developer who has never developed before, site built, to use modular. I would say after they're seasoned from a site build perspective, then I would say their experiences and expectations about construction will align better because honestly, like all construction projects, nothing is perfect. And sometimes you're making modifications in the field to make it work. Variety of reasons.
Don't dive into the deep end of the pool, essentially, is what I'm hearing.
That's probably the best bit of advice. I actually just had a client ask me about that, and he's never done development before. And I said, I would just do these townhomes that you want to do for rent as site build first to get your feet wet in development because there's enough headaches with construction and development without, as you said, diving into the deep end of the pool.
Very good. So, and again, without ruining too much of your presentation, because I don't want to do that, can you share what you're most looking forward to sharing with the attendees at World of Modular?
Sure. I want to share design parameters for a variety of case study projects to attempt to take the mystery and myth out of design using a modular system. And how I start out my presentation is showing really what modular perception is and what it really is. And then what I do is I go through a series of case studies, beginning with designing the most simple structure, a house. And we go from there into more complex buildings, such as multifamily, student housing, and hotels, to just kind of show how, the volumetric parameters of a modular box work in laying out floor plans and how this is the same stuff that you've seen before with on-site 2x6s and roofing nails, but it's a bit different.
So you've presented at other shows before. What made you decide that the World of Modular show was a place you wanted to be? What about the show attracted you?
Well, I think there's a lot of great networking. There's a lot of different perspectives from people that you meet there, vendors that serve the industry. So it's really an opportunity to learn.
What's next for you?
So we're looking at a student housing project in North Carolina that we did some conceptual design for about 2 years ago, and now it is actually coming to fruition with financing. So we're looking at that starting up here probably summertime, and then another student housing project for a university down in Louisiana that'll also be modular. We're doing a couple of townhome projects in Colorado for workforce housing, where speed to market is the key, along with acknowledging a very short construction season. And then we're also looking at some hotel projects as well in Alabama.
Very cool. And lastly, a question I like asking people from all different areas of modular construction: what do you think the next 3 to 5 years will be like for the modular construction industry?
Well, as I stated earlier, I think the construction industry is predominantly populated by late adopters because you've done the same thing for 50 years, and if you change, it's scary. There could be liability associated with it, and so forth. So here's my take. I think the industry will better embrace this method of delivery now that it's been around and become more prevalent for a while due to labor shortages, tighter construction cycles, improvements in technology and the manufacturing process. And frankly, I think because of that, it will likely result in better cost structures for developers.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate your time today. It's been great to talk with you. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you at World of Modular later on in March.
Well, we are as too. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
My name is John McMullen, and this has been another episode of Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction. Until next time.